Hey guys, it's Mountain Walk, and today we're going to be talking about Old Frame, another deck tech with Suicide Black. This is going to be sweet. This is going to be a nice additional companion piece from the original piece I did on Suicide Black in the Most Busted series. Except instead of looking at a historical deck, we're going to be looking at a deck in a sort of current format, so to speak. So let's get to it. All right, so like I said, we already talked about this deck a little bit, Suicide Black, and it's going to be very similar to the one we talked about. But we're going to be going a little bit more in depth, and there are going to be some differences in card choices. And we're looking at the format for Old Frame specifically, which is 93 to 2003, but it's much more developed in certain ways than the old Type 1 or Vintage, as it's known nowadays, format was. Some of it's partially due to just additional knowledge and theory, but it's also it's a closed format, so there's going to be more work done, and things are just going to be sort of reach their final form, and there's just more people to work on it too. So it's a little bit different due to certain factors, but not completely different. So old frame is a bit different than vintage, and there was a lot of crazy stuff going on. For example, there's a lot of restrictions from around 99 to about 2003. There's all the Saga stuff, then there was Necro, then there was Factor Fiction, then there was Gush and LED and Burning Wish and so on. So there's a lot of crazy stuff going on at this time. So it's interesting to see how things sort of eventually settled out in this format in old frame specifically. So that's pretty cool. All right, and here we go. We got the deck list for Suicide Black, and it's beautiful. Look at all those fours and ones in the main deck. Absolutely beautiful. It's either restricted or it's a four of. Great, absolutely great. A lot of redundancy, a lot of consistency. Great mana base. You can't go wrong. I mean, that's the nice thing about playing monocolor decks is you're just playing a bunch of basic lands. So in this case, 16 swamps or 18 swamps if you're subbing out the Lotus and Jet. Uh, Great there, not weak to Wasteland at all. Of course, you can play your own Wasteland and Strip Mine, which is, again, incredible disruption. Got a bunch of broken restricted cards, which are either tutors or just bombs that you basically win if you resolve them. Then, of course, we have all the spell-based disruption, duress, him, sync. Again, this is just great against basically everything, especially in the first couple turns of the game, where this deck can play multiples of those cards pretty easily. So very powerful there. And of course, the creature base, which again is geared towards beating control and combo decks. Really powerful stuff here. There's a little bit of wiggle room, right, if we're talking about mixed metagames or aggro heavy metagames, but this is of course the basically the standard list. And like, say if we're playing against if we know what our opponent's on, say either game 2 or 3, or we just know that this person plays this deck, say against combo decks, first thing we want to do is just slam a bunch of disruption on them hard and fast as possible, and then slam a beater afterwards to try and end the game. For control decks, typically you'll go the other way. If possible, you'll just slam your negator first turn or something, and then hit them with a bunch of disruption, because you'll typically have at least 1 or 2 turns where you're able to play a creature before they can really start doing anything super scary, like say slamming an abyss or a moat or whatever, which is very difficult, if not impossible, to come back from. So keep that in mind. But typically, and really even before that, if you have the option, even if it's just going to slow you down, even if you're like, oh, you know, uh, I can writ into this guy, or I can just play a turn one duress. It's typically better to just play turn one duress. Duress is probably the best, safest play, regardless of whatever your deck you're playing against, especially game one. If you don't know what your opponent is playing, you're able to duress, see their plan, take their valuable card, and then craft your game plan around that. So you'll be able to know what to tutor for, right? Do I need to hit them with another sinkhole, right? To keep them off double mana, to keep them from reaching their fourth mana to cast something backbreaking. Do I need to keep them off green because all these guys, this dude's playing survival? I mean, what do you need to do? So I guess maybe even before that, like super mega baseline, play duress first, gives you a bunch of information, and of course you don't have any issues with all sorts of other nasty cards, which we'll talk about in a moment. But yeah, first turn duress might be the most basic, best baseline thing to do. And then after that, like I said, if your opponent's on combo, hit them with more disruption. If they're on control, slam down a negator or something, or a flesh reaver or whatever, and put them under a bunch of pressure, and then hit them with a ton more discard. So yeah, again, you don't always have the ability to craft your game plan like that, but if it's possible, yeah, that's typically what you'll want to do. But yeah, nothing too wonky here. This is kind of like I said, sort of like a tempo deck in some ways. Yeah, so pretty sweet, pretty sweet. All right, so now there are some different cards we can jam in a sideboard. Like I said, a lot of the stuff is sort of based upon like what we expect. So we expect more aggressive decks. We might play, for example, Phyrexian Warbeast. Phyrexian Warbeast and Masticore, of course, are good cards against something like Sly or whatnot. So that's pretty sweet, pretty good there. And of course, in the sideboard, there's quite a few different options. There's things like Planar Void, right? So Planar Void, it can be played in place of Tormod's Crypt, but Tormod's Crypt's better, especially if you're on the draw, and they're able to bin like say like a World Gorger Dragon, something like Tormod's Crypt's a little bit better due to just being able to remove the dragon before they're able to do their stuff. So that's kind of nice. But Planar Void definitely an option to consider. Dystopia, of course, is good against Stompy, as well as things like Enchantress or Parfait. Of course, it's good against something like Moat as well. Again, another option to consider. So there's a wide range of stuff. A lot of side grades, a lot of stuff you can really move things around a little bit to see sort of what's the best thing going on. All right. So the most important thing is to metagame. We really want to metagame. Again, typically the list I posted or I just showed you is the best one. I mean, this is just the best one. These kind of older formats are going to be extremely combo and control heavy because these are the decks that are basically powered up by all of these different Moxen, all of these different cards like Ancestral, Draw Sevens, Fast Mana, things like that. It's going to heavily skew towards combo and control decks. Those are a lot better. So it just makes sense to skew your deck heavily in that direction. Again, you don't need a ton of extra cards to board in against them because most of the cards in your main deck are already good against combo and control decks. So you can kind of have, in a way, a transformational sideboard. So again, War Beast, Masticore, Powder Keg, that kind of stuff. More creature removal, Contagion, Edict, things like that. So yeah. Of course, Masticore is actually pretty good in mixed metagames, just it's hard to kill, it's good against the Abyss, so it's not like the worst card to play main deck. So that's, again, something to consider. And of course, because of all the extra tutors and so forth, there's more emphasis on Necropotence, so it might actually be a good idea to cut a couple Flesh Reaver for Powder Cake or Null Rod, depending on the metagame. That might be a good idea, something I've certainly considered. And of course, like I said, this is not a deck you really want to play in aggro-heavy metagames, at least without, again, the Kegs, Masticores, and Warbeast main deck. But even still, it's maybe not the best plan. And of course, the big difference from the older decks that I was playing was because I played a pile, a lot more, basically all of the restricted black cards. I mean, it's hard to overstate how powerful Necropotence and Yawgmoth's Will is in this deck because it really slams the door shut on all the advantage you gain from, your Duresses, Sinkholes, Hymns, and Wastelands and stuff. it's really really good at just like closing the door on that kind of stuff, giving you the final last burst of cards you need to win the game. I mean, those cards are very, very difficult to beat. I mean, it's really hard to lose after you play Yawgmoth's Will, even if you just get a couple cards back. I mean, it's completely ridiculous. So that's pretty much the reason why I'm playing like things like Vampiric Tutor, Consultation, and stuff. I mean, obviously these cards are already busted. Like, oh, why are you playing Demonic Consultation? Because it's a good card. The deck plays a bunch of 4-ofs. Like, why wouldn't you, right? So yeah, that's pretty much the reason. So yeah, all the restricted cards are insane. They, and for example, all the you have 3 more or less unrestricted tutors, so that's like playing in some respects 4 Necropotents or 4 Yawgmoth's Will, or gets you additional copies of a hymn or sinkhole or whatever. So yeah, yeah. Pretty obvious why we're playing more broken restricted cards, because, well, these cards are basically broken in any context, and that's why we're playing them. So now we need to watch out for misdirection. This is like the really big thing. This is why you lead with duress, is because just like the old Type 1 or vintage formats, there's a ton of misdirection. This, of course, is mostly because of things like Ancestral Recall, almost solely because of Ancestral Recall, because it's such a powerful card. Of course, Ancestral Recall says target, so being able to misdirect Ancestral Recall is a very, very good thing. Um, we there's a lot of misdirections, and so we want to lead with duress. Duress cannot be misdirected back to you, so you can duress their misdirection, and then of course hit them with a hymn or a sinkhole. So there is, it's typically better, for example, if they say they have 2 misdirections, you should duress and leave with like a sinkhole, because that's not like the worst thing typically if it gets misdirected. So yeah, or of course, just lead with like a threat, like say Nintuko Shade or something. So duress, Nintuko Shade, or Flash Reaver or something. That would typically be better. But it is important to watch out for misdirection. You don't want to get your hymns or sinkholes, if you can help it, misdirected back to you, because that can be very brutal, very brutal. There are no other viable creatures than the 4 in the deck, or the optional Masticore or War Beast, because that's, at the time, there's just nothing else that's going to be good enough. They're not fast enough for vintage, like any of the zombies or the shadow creatures or any of that crap. It's just not good enough. It's just not good enough. Power to toughness ratio isn't there. You can't give your opponent free turns, especially with the card quality that they can be drawing into. It's just not possible. So Masticore, War Beast are great against aggressive decks. The rest is what you want to be playing against the combo or control decks. So yeah, that's just how it is. The other ones just suck, honestly. And the deck, of course, leans very hard on Necro and Yawgmoth's Will. You don't need those cards to win, right? You can cut off like all of your opponent's ability or severely cripple them from casting spells. So you don't need Necropotency, Yawgmoth's Will. These are just like the extra, like, I mean, just they're backbreaking, right? So, this prevents your opponent from recovering. You can Yawgmoth's Will back all the disruption you play. You can Necropotence into more disruption. These cards are insanely powerful. There's no reason not to play them. They're just too good. And the deck breaks these cards pretty well because it just plays a super low curve plus the main acceleration. Of course, again, you don't have to play Lotus or Mox Jet. Obviously, they're upgrades, but you don't have to play them. You can, of course, just replace them with 2 Swamps, but Lotus, Jet, plus Ritual is just insane with stuff like Necropotence and Yawgmoth's Will. Just more fast mana is ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. So yeah, this deck is definitely, it's not exactly a Necropotence deck or a Yawgmoth's Will deck. It just breaks them very hard because this is an aggressive deck, a sort of black tempo deck, if you will, that is really pretty happy to get a bunch of free cards. And the rituals late game actually are very good. because again, it's good with Necro, it's good with Yawgmoth's Will, whether in your hand or the graveyard, or of course with the aforementioned Nantuko Shade, it's just a giant growth, which is, I mean, pretty sweet. People don't really expect it and don't think of Dark Ritual as a giant growth, but it totally is with Nantuko Shade, so that's pretty sweet. And of course, most of the cards in the deck are pretty binary, right? So some stuff is basically strictly just good against aggro, some is just strictly good against combo and control. Mask Core, like I said, you get a little bit of both, but it's primarily an anti-aggro card. Again, same thing with War Beast, it can be blocked and nothing happens. If they have to spend 2 cards, you only lose 2 cards, so that's not a big deal. Whereas something like Flash Reaver, it's a lot worse, or Phyrexian Negator, it's a lot worse against aggressive decks. So yeah. But typically, yeah, you'll put all your anti-aggro stuff in the board, or you'll put a little bit of aggro stuff in the main deck, and then put some combo control stuff in the sideboard. So it's kind of binary in that respect. I mean, there's a little bit of overlap in mixed metagames, but typically, if you're playing online, it looks like it's almost completely dominated by combo and control stuff. You might see some workshop stuff, so you might want to play more Edicts or something like that instead of something like Contagion. But again, something to think about, But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's how we're gonna do it. That's our deck. You know, again, a lot of the stuff we said previously is true, right? The most busted deck series, right? So it's primarily a deck that's supposed to smash on combo and control, sideboard heavy into anti-aggro stuff against stuff like Sly. And just drop the hammer and abuse the busted restricted cards. Of course, we in this deck we leaned even harder on the busted restricted cards. Of course, something like Necropotence isn't that great against something like Sly, so you're going to be boarding that out. But everything else is pretty sweet. Of course, you know, got the Mask Core and the War Beast to sub in for your bad beaters against aggro decks. But everything else, yeah, you're good to go. So yeah, there you go. That's pretty much it. A lot of the old frame stuff I've only seen like the decks that I've been placing. You know, I've seen a little bit of Food Chain Goblins, a little bit of Workshop stuff, but it's mostly just combo control or aggro control stuff. So you know, like Roadhog or whatever. But yeah, all the dudes there in our deck, Hypnotic Spectre, Nantuko Shade, Negator, Flash Reaver, are very good in those instances. So yeah, pretty simple. Just want to be slamming those Duresses, Hymns, and Sinkholes, and then jam a guy. Or you can, of course, just jam a Negator first turn, especially if you're on the play, jamming like first turn Negator or Hippie, and then following it up with a pile of Disruption can bring down basically any deck. So yeah, you have very powerful draws, you have very powerful cards, very good cards in most instances. So yeah, good stuff here. So that's about it, guys. So thanks for stopping by. I hope you enjoyed this old frame deck tech thingy. Talked a little bit about this and that and the other. Yeah, there we go. So thanks for stopping by and have a great day.